Picking up where we left off after my slight mistake, we have Chapter 6, Uproar. Shaggy and Scooby-Doo follow Scott toward a long building attached to several large cages. They passed under a sign reading, Big Cats. Scooby-Doo looked up at the sign. Ruh-roh! I can't believe we haven't found the others yet, said Scott. Shaggy ran ahead to the first store he could find. Like I say, we hide out in this closet until this all blows over. Shaggy, wait, yelled Scott. It was too late. Shaggy opened the door and was buried under a pile of unicycles, juggling pins, and colorful balls. Giggled Scooby. Shaggy climbed out of the mound. Like I think you have some storage problems around here. Scott shrugged. Like I said, a bunch of these animals came from the circus. Now I'm up to my elbows in circus stuff. Scooby tapped Shaggy on the shoulder. Raggy, look! He pointed to the two vampires gliding up the pathway. Yipes and double yipes, shouted Shaggy. Now there are two vampires, we gotta hide. Scott ran down the side of the building while Shaggy and Scooby-Doo jumped into the closet. Scooby grabbed the doorknob with his tail and slammed the door shut behind him. The vampires floated up to the door. They looked at each other, and then one reached for the doorknob. They hissed when the door flew open. Shaggy jumped out wearing tan shorts and a tan shirt. Careful, warned Shaggy. Dangerous lion on the loose. Shaggy stepped out of the closet. He wore an old mop atop his head like a lion's mane. Scooby growled and pretended to claw at the vampires. Oh, wait. Nope. No stuck page. The monsters looked at each other and then back to Scooby and Shaggy. They floated closer. I don't think they're buying a Scoob, whispered Shaggy. Give them a roar. Scooby-Doo planted his feet on the ground and opened his mouth wide. Roar! The vampires flew back in surprise and slammed into each other. Then they sped away back toward the path. That showed him, said Shaggy. Great job, buddy. Well, Raggy, said Scooby-Doo. Red wasn't Ree. What do you mean it wasn't you? Asked Shaggy. Shaggy and Scooby turned to see a real lion standing behind them. Zoinks! Shouted Shaggy. He jumped into Scooby-Doo's arms. It's okay, said Scott. He held on to the lion's leash. This is Harambe. He's from a circus, too. Harambe leaned forward and gave Shaggy's face a big lick. Shaggy laughed nervously. As long as he's not picturing us as two T-bone steaks. Scott laughed. Let me put it back in his cage so we can find the others. Chapter 7, KG Discovery. That last chapter went by fast. Velma, Daphne, and Fred followed the thin tire tracks to the back of the zoo. They stopped in front of a wall of bushes and tree branches. Velma aimed her flashlight at the thick bush. That doesn't make any sense, she said. The tracks stop right here. Where do we go from here? Asked Daphne. Fred frowned as he looked at the wall of greenery. There's no way around. It's a dead end. Daphne pulled at one of the small tree limbs. Hey, look! This branch has been cut! Fred leaned closer. This is just a big pile of brush. He pulled away some more branches. Let's clear this out and see where these tracks lead. As he and Daphne began moving branches, Velma switched off the flashlight. Hey, where's the light? Asked Daphne. Do you hear that? Whispered Velma. Footsteps, said Daphne. Someone's coming. Quick, hide, said Fred. Velma, Daphne, and Velma ducked behind a nearby tree. The footsteps grew louder and louder. Shaggy, Scooby, and Scott ran down the path. I thought I saw a flashlight over here, said Scott, but I don't see anyone. Scott, Fred stepped out from behind the tree. Is that you? There you are, Fred, said Scott. We've been looking all over for you, said Shaggy. We've been running and hiding for a couple of creepy vampires. Us too, said Daphne. We barely had time to look for clues. And we were just about to see where these tire tracks lead before you showed up, added Velma. Everyone worked together to pull away the cut branches. When the bush was cleared, two doors stood before them. That's not supposed to be there, said Scott. They look like the doors on the back of a semi-trailer, said Velma. Let's open them and see, suggested Fred. Fred and Shaggy opened the doors and saw that it was the back of a trailer, and the trailer was full of different-sized cages. The cages were full of animals. Shaggy pointed to a large crate. Like, that's the baby elephant we saw. Rah, rah, agreed Scooby-Doo. Daphne pointed to the cage next to the elephant. And I'd recognize that juggling gorilla anywhere. It's all the missing animals, gasped Scott. He pointed to a cage containing 2 little bats, including the vampire bats. Like someone has been stashing them here the whole time, said Shaggy. I better get all these animals back to their proper places, said Scott. Velma tapped her chin. I think it's time to cage some vampires. Chapter 8, Plan B. Shaggy and Scooby-Doo walked down one of the zoo's main trails. They looked around, expecting the vampires to come out at any moment. Like, just once I'd like Fred to come up with a plan where we aren't the bait, said Shaggy. Who read it? Agreed Scooby. Fred stood atop the roof of a nearby building. He scanned the area with binoculars. He could see most of the zoo from where he stood. Fred zoomed in to make sure Daphne and Velma were in place for his plan. But so far, there was no sign of the vampires. Back on the ground, Shaggy and Scooby kept walking. Like maybe those creepy vampires decided to give up, suggested Shaggy. No such luck, said Scooby-Doo. Shaggy and Scooby spotted the 2 vampires floating across the pathway ahead. I can't believe I'm going to do this, said Shaggy. He waved his arms in the air. Yoo-hoo, creepy vampires! The vampires turned their glowing red eyes towards Shaggy. The monsters flew straight at him and Scooby. Come on, Scoob, Shaggy yelled as he began to run. Feet don't fail me now. Rah, agreed Scooby-Doo. Reader. The 2 ran as fast as they could from the vampires, but the monsters quickly caught up to them. Okay, Scoob, said Shaggy. Time for our secret weapon. Shaggy and Scooby dove into the bushes. They burst out at the other side, each riding a unicycle. They pedaled quickly as the vampires continued to chase them. This will give us some speed, huh, Scoob? Asked Shaggy. Yeah, agreed Scooby-Doo. Raster! Shaggy and Scooby led the vampires straight into the monkey exhibit. Get ready, Velma, shouted Fred. Velma hid behind a small group of trees. She held a thick rope in both hands. Ready, she replied. Shaggy and Scooby pedaled towards the trees. The vampires were close behind them. When Shaggy and Scooby were under the trees, Fred yelled down at Velma. Now! Velma pulled on the large rope. Just then, Shaggy's unicycle hit a rock. Zoinks! Shaggy tumbled to the ground and landed under the trees. The vampires flew past Shaggy as the giant cage fell down from the trees. Shaggy was trapped, but the vampires were still free. And angry. Shaggy stood and grabbed the bars of the cage. Like, at least I'm not trapped in here with a couple of creepy vampires. Oh no, said Fred. He cupped his hands around his mouth and shouted down, Plan B! Scooby-Doo whimpered as the vampires still chased him. Velma pulled up beside him on her own unicycle. This way, Scoob, she said. Velma and Scooby-Doo turned down the path leading towards the big cats exhibit. Get ready, Daphne, shouted Fred. Daphne was hiding with a rope of her own. She held it with both hands and got ready. Not the next chapter yet. The vampires floated closer as Velma and Scooby neared the long building. Okay, Scooby, said Velma. Remember the plan. Get ready to turn left. Right, agreed Scooby. See, not right, Velma corrected. Left. Right. Scooby-Doo agreed again. Left. Great, said Velma. Now I'm confused. Now, Daphne, Fred shouted from above. Scooby-Doo turned left and Velma turned right. The vampires floated after Scooby while Velma turned right into Fred's trap. Daphne pulled a rope and a huge net scooped Velma off the ground. Scooby-Doo looked around. Velma? Velma! All he could see was 2 dark figures chasing him. Scooby gulped. Ruh-roh! Chapter 9. Plan Z. Scooby-Doo pedaled faster and faster. He zipped around corners and zigzagged around trees. But the vampires continued to race after him. Ha 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 ha. The monsters laughed as they sailed closer. Raggy? asked Scooby-Doo. Rapney? Relma? Anybody? Scott joined Fred up on the roof. How's it going, Fred? Not good at all, said Fred. We just bungled Plan B. We don't have a Plan C. I have an idea, said Scott. We're in the zoo, so how about a Plan Z? The gang watched the vampires continue to chase Scooby through the park. Scooby pedaled as fast as he could. He whimpered as the vampires floated closer and closer. They closed in, reaching out for him. Scooby shut his eyes tight. Don't worry, Scoob, said a voice beside him. Scooby-Doo opened his eyes to see Shaggy riding a unicycle beside him. Like time for Plan C, pal, said Shaggy. Follow me. The two turned left down a different path. Up ahead, they saw a row of elephants on each side of the trail. As they got closer, each elephant dipped its trunk into a large bucket of water. When Shaggy and Scooby led the vampires past the elephants, the animals blasted the vampires with streams of water. The vampires coughed and sputtered as they pushed through the water. Like that could soften them up, said Shaggy. Huh, Scoob? Rah! Agreed Scooby-Doo. He giggled. Hee! Just then, Fred and Velma pulled up on unicycles beside Shaggy and Scooby. This way, gang, said Fred. He led them down another path. The vampires were soaked and angry. They chased after the gang with blazing red eyes. Fred and Velma led the monsters to a train line with animals. Different kinds of apes stood on each side of the path. There were chimpanzees, orangutans, and gorillas juggling fruit. I think we better duck, warned Velma. Scooby-Doo and the gang ducked down as they pedaled forward. All the apes began throwing fruits at the vampires. The monsters grunted and swerved as they were bombarded. Scooby reached up and grabbed the flying animal. He took a bite. Ruby-doo! As the gang left the apes behind, the vampires still followed. Shaggy looked over his shoulder and gulped. Like these two just don't give up. Now, to end this story, next time.